Brilliant. Thank you, Carol. Morning, everybody. People joining is still pinging off, so we might have to deal with that for a couple of minutes. But thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this morning for our latest Child Health and Wellbeing Network Huddle. This time focusing on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and it is proving to be one of our most popular yet. There's a lot of interest in this topic, which is really heartening to see. It's so important, and we're really glad people are here to learn a bit more about it. Just by way of housekeeping, as we start, when you are not speaking, if you could please keep your microphone on mute, that'd be really helpful. And you can sit with your camera off and relax if you so wish while you listen. We will have a part of the first part of the session will be our presentations for you to listen to, and then we'll have an interactive Q&A session in the second hour. So please sit back and relax. In the meantime, you can use the chat function to pose any questions or any thoughts as the speakers are talking as we go along, and then they will be picked up in the discussion session a bit later on. If you want to move the slides along for me, Carol, that'll be fab. Thank you. Hello, that's me. I'm Jenny Aiken. I'm one of the network delivery managers in the network, and I'm just going to start us off before we get into the meat of the session with a little intro of the Child Health and Wellbeing Network for those of you who aren't familiar with our work. My colleague Amelia will end the session with a little bit more detail about how you can get involved if you aren't already. Thanks, Carol. So just by way of intro, we are the North East and North Cumbria Child Health and Wellbeing Network. We cover the whole North East North Cumbria region as part of the Integrated Care Board, the ICB. That's our footprint there, all the way from the top of Northumberland down to North Yorkshire and over to the Cumbrian coast in the west. So it's quite a big patch. We're a big ICB, and there are a lot of challenges that we have in this region that I'm sure a majority of you will be more than aware of. Big challenges around deprivation and some key health challenges as well. Thanks, Carol. We have been on a journey since around 2018 to get to where we are today. We weren't always hosted by the ICB. We've been on a little bit of a tour of different funding routes and different structures in the last few years. But we essentially started off with a bunch of enthusiastic people who wanted to do something. And here we are today, formally part of the ICB, which is great and enables us to do so much more with our work. Thanks, Carol. So just to show you what a flavour of our work, we have our priorities wheel, as we call it, children, young people and families at the centre of it. Youth voice and engagement is really important to us and informs our programme of work. And those are our key priorities around the outside. And I'm sure you can probably appreciate that none of them are in isolation either. There's a sort of intersectional element to a lot of it. And we do have a broad programme of work that covers a lot of those different priority areas. And essentially our main aim is to encourage people to work together. Collaborative working can achieve so much more, and as part of the integrated care system as well, we link up with partners across the system, and our membership of individuals is really broad. So we bring all those people together, try and share good practice, drive work forward, and just connect people to make things happen. Thank you. Just to highlight some of those key health challenges that I mentioned, we have some of the worst figures in the country for some health metrics, and obviously the deprivation that we have in this area is considerable and has a huge effect on some of the outcomes that children and young people experience. Next slide, Carol, thanks. Just to show you the population breakdown, when we're talking about young people, we take that to be up to 25 when they have special educational needs and disabilities. So the population there for 0 to 17 is around 20% of the population. It goes up to about 25% if you take up to age 25. So it's a not inconsiderable number of people are counted as children and young people. So it's a quarter of the population really that is our focus. Thank you. There's a report on the ICB website in our section of the website called Facts of Life, which has informed a lot of our work over the last few years. We created it in 2021 using data from then, but if anything, it's probably gotten worse in some respects since then in the aftermath of COVID. But there's some really useful figures for people to use, and you can have a look at your own area to see how it compares in some of those key metrics as well. It's still there as a usable resource. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the reach that we have a broad programme of work, as I mentioned. Some of it is mandated through NHS England, through the CYP transformation programme. We work with a lot of clinical advisors and non-clinical advisors. We have our youth board, now known as the Know Our Impact Group, and a network of networks to make sure that we can bring that youth voice across the region. And then we have our comms that we put out as well. And this engagement work is really important to us. These huddles are part of that programme of engagement with people who want to learn more about what we do and what's going on in the region. And I'm sure somebody will put in the chat, and we'll probably put it in several times, the link to register as a member of the network, and that will ensure that you can get our weekly Child Health Tuesday email bulletin as well, so that you can always see what's going on and engage in any opportunities you're interested in. Thanks, Carol. I did mention the Know Our Impact Group, the youth board. They created their own manifesto for engagement as to how, as young people, they wanted to work with the adult executive board, now our strategic oversight group. And there's a brilliant video there. The link could be in the chat, but also when you get these slides, you can have a look at that link. And then just finally, we always include this quote when we sum up the journey that we've been on through the network. So Sir Al Ainsley Green was the first Children's Commissioner for England, and he was really supportive of our establishment as a network back in 2018, and came along to a couple of our engagement events that we held at the time. And this is just a key quote from his book, The Betrayal of British Childhood, which is so pertinent, because it's just sums up our need to advocate for our children and young people. And if we don't stand up for them, and especially when they're unable to stand up for themselves, who else will? So that's very much, I think, the ethos of why we're here today, for this under-recognised condition of FASD, and hopefully we'll be able to make the changes that are really needed. Thank you, Carol. So I'm now going to hand over to our chair for the session, Adele Pearson, who's Director of Academy Improvement and co-head of Hopewood Academy, among other things. And she's also one of our system leaders in the network for education. So she's an amazing source of expertise for us to tap into. And she's really interested in this topic today as well. So we're grateful to have her expertise and guidance through the session. I'll hand over to you, Adele. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, and good morning, colleagues. Welcome. This is so exciting that we have just about 200 colleagues from up and down the country, and not just in the North East and North Cumbria. So really excited, and welcome to today's huddle. We were just talking earlier, this is our biggest huddle to date, and I think huddles can be really, really powerful in terms of bringing colleagues from cross systems together to experience that collaboration and learning. So really, really delighted to be here this morning in terms of chairing this huddle, and welcome colleagues who are going to take us through in terms of fetal alcohol. So we've got Dr. Helen, who's going to start us off from a clinical perspective, and then Maria, who is the founder and director of FASD Network UK. And then we're going to have a short comfort break, and then hear from Claire Devaney-Glynn to bring us the voice of the family. So really, really excited and interested to hear what all of our colleagues have got to say. And then we are going to have a question and answer session later in the programme. So it's my absolute pleasure to hand over to Helen. Helen brings us a vast range of expertise in this field, in that clinical field. So over to you, Helen.
Good morning, everyone, and thank
Hello,
you
Robbie. Just
so
Dana
much.
Catmull from Discovery Special Academy. Hiya, are you okay?
Sorry about that. Hello, everyone, and welcome. A little bit of an issue there with the sound. So yes, I'm the head of community and children and young people based in North Cumbria, working for the ICB, and I've been interested in the whole issue of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder since about 2013. So I've been working with Maria alongside her for most of that time as well. So yeah, I'm going to try and give you a little bit of insight, a bit of background, why it is so important, and just try and give you some context as well. so that you can really appreciate why this is such an important issue and why it probably affects every service. I've been looking at the logins and the chats, and this is probably going to affect every single service that you're working in. So I think this is going to be really relevant to everybody. So welcome. So next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of context, obviously alcohol is our drug of choice in the UK and in Western societies. And the stats are pretty consistent that around 80% of the UK population drink, and that happens in just about every ONS study. The findings are very similar. So I think because it's deemed as an acceptable drug, it's available everywhere. It's available at supermarkets. It's available in even garages. It's just everywhere, that it's deemed as acceptable and not harmful. And we see this everywhere. This is actually a picture taken from Newcastle. You can see this sort of image. 7 nights a week, really. It's classed as a party city. And I think because alcohol has become so normalized now, people don't realize the risks of harms associated with it. And one of the quite sobering, if you like, excuse the pun, statistics is the fact that binge drinking is actually most common in women of childbearing age. So those between about 18 to 40, I think 45, I think was the age categories. Binge drinking is actually the most common in this age group. So it really is a risk for women. And one of the really startling prevalence rates is actually the UK is the 4th highest in the world for estimated prevalence of alcohol exposure in pregnancy. So that's shocking. So I think we came behind Ireland, Belarus, and Denmark. So we're the 4th highest. So 41% of pregnancies are exposed to alcohol. That is a lot. So it's just something to think about when you're processing the rest of the information I'm going to share with you. So yeah, women are often drinking as much as men, whereas in the past they didn't. I think probably since the 90s they do. And it's actually, cirrhosis of the liver used to be something that was seen more in women over 50. Now it's become younger and younger. We've got women in their 40s and 30s dying of cirrhosis of the liver due to the earlier and increased use of alcohol. Next slide, please. So it's long been agreed by all scientists and doctors that, like smoking, alcohol is associated with miscarriage, with premature delivery, with low birth weights, with stillbirths, and with cot death as well. So that hasn't really been under debate. What has been debated is the harmfulness of alcohol causing brain damage in children. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. So we do know alcohol is a toxin. We get intoxicated by alcohol. We know it's associated with at least 7 forms of cancers, which is really well advertised in the Northeast with my colleagues at Balance in particular. So you may well have seen some of those adverts that are on, particularly during World Cups, sporting events, etc. But crucially, alcohol is also a teratogen. So it's actually harmful in pregnancy and can cause damage to any part of development of an unborn baby. Any of the 11 organ systems in your body can be affected by alcohol. And I think in the past people thought, oh well, I'm metabolizing the alcohol, it'll be fine. It's actually, we know now that alcohol passes freely through the placenta. So what the mum's drinking, the baby's drinking as well. And we also know that there's lots of factors that affect the outcome. So some women can drink and the pregnancy will be fine, and others can have quite a relatively small amount, and actually there can be an impact on the unborn child. And that can be genetics or diet. There's a whole host of suspected factors, but we do know that the timing, the frequency, and the quantity of alcohol exposure throughout the pregnancy are really key considerations, and something we try and document where we can if we're actually speaking to the women about their pregnancies. So because we don't know how much is harmful or who's going to be impacted the most, we have to have a clear message, which we do now, excuse me, making it clear to women that alcohol should be avoided throughout the duration of pregnancy and at any time when you're trying for a pregnancy as well. And one of the key considerations that we really have to get better at and just be mindful of in our practice is that alcohol consumption in pregnancy is underreported and rarely documented. And I'm a midwife by background, and my profession has been lamentably poor at documenting this in the past. We're getting much better now, we're aware of it, but that has huge implications, particularly for diagnosis later on. Next slide, please. Okay, so in 2016, we had the Chief Medical Officer guidelines that provided a clear message to all women and their families, so that if you're pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, the safest approach is not to drink at all, to keep the risks to your baby to a minimum. So it was really good to get that message out. In 1981, the USA put this message out, so it's taken us 35 years to catch up, but we got there eventually, and that message is still percolating down to clinical practice at grassroots level. Next slide, please. So this is a really important slide because women are often vilified in this process, and that is so wrong. They are not the villains in this at all. There's lots of reasons why women drink in pregnancy, and as you can see from the pictures on here, we are constantly bombarded by advertising by the alcohol industry. They actively target women for starters. So the other thing is, a lot of women don't necessarily know that they're pregnant straight away. So a lot of women will drink before that confirmation of pregnancy, before they get that. So that's a huge issue. So, and given that 80% of women are probably drinking anyway, to have 50% of pregnancies that aren't planned, there's going to be a lot of women who have drunk in pregnancy before they realised they were pregnant. So it's not about blaming and shaming. It's trying to understand the bigger context of this so that we can feel more comfortable asking women about their pregnancy without having the stigma that surrounds drinking in pregnancy. Obviously, we only had the Chief Medical Officer guidelines changed in 2016, and I don't think that's necessarily reached everyone in society yet. So women don't realise that alcohol is harmful to their unborn baby, and I think that's been something that's often perpetuated by parents, by grandmas who've maybe been drinking. They were told to drink stout in pregnancy, for example, to increase the iron levels. There's lots of fake news, if you like, around this issue. So we can't blame women who have had an alcohol exposed pregnancy. And like we said before, alcohol's a social norm. And then we have some sections of women who drink to self-medicate. They're in awful situations. They might be suffering domestic violence. They might be homeless. There's a whole raft of reasons why women might drink. So it's just to be mindful of that and not think of it as these women are terrible. They are not. No woman ever goes out to willfully harm her child. This is just, this is part of the bigger context of alcohol in our society. Next slide, please. So there's no surprise really that because of all the stigma and taboo around alcohol in pregnancy, that women feel really guilty about self-reporting. So if they're speaking to their midwife, they might feel a little bit hesitant to actually report what they have been drinking. They're worried about feeling judged, they're feeling guilty. Some women might be concerned that they're going to lose their children. And often as nurses, midwives, doctors, we might not have been asking the right questions either. So I've heard midwives say, oh, you don't drink, do you? Well, a woman that might have had a drink and might want some support isn't going to feel comfortable saying, well, actually, I did. That it's really not setting the scene to help that woman to disclose and get the support that she needs. So FASD is an emotionally loaded condition. It carries with it lots of stigma and moral judgments. And just bear in mind that women don't get pregnant alone. So we need to look at this as a family unit and as a society as a whole. Next slide, please. I probably need to speed up a bit too. So the BMA back in 2007 classed FASD as the most common non-genetic cause of learning disability in the UK. And that's quite surprising because we have a lot of talk about ADHD, about autism, and they're all, really relevant and important conditions. But actually, FASD is the most common non-genetic cause of learning disability. So we need to reflect that in our services and our priorities. So it is permanent and there isn't any cure, but it is preventable. So hence we really push this no alcohol, no risk message in pregnancy. Now, most people think about the child with the FASD characteristics. And there's a picture here of the sort of the narrow eye openings, the smooth upper lip, the smooth philtrum, the thin upper lip. That's sort of the part of the classic picture. But actually, less than 10% of children present with these sentinel features, and over 90% of children with FASD will look like any other child in their classroom, which is why this is classed as a hidden disability, and it isn't always given the recognition that it deserves. Next slide, please. So I like this slide because it just gives everybody a quick reminder about the development of an embryo and a fetus, and it just illustrates here the different organ systems that are developing at different times, and how alcohol at any of these particular points in the pregnancy can have a detrimental impact on whether it's the heart, the eyes. And actually, a lot of these presentations are common in our FASD children and young people. A lot have dental issues. They might have very thin dentine, and there's a lot of studies that need to be done around even the dental presentations. A lot of these children have hearing issues. They might have glue ear. So it's really important to just bear that in mind. But the key point from this is that the central nervous system is developing throughout the whole of the pregnancy, throughout the 3 trimesters of pregnancy. The brain and the spinal cord is developing. So any alcohol exposure during any of the pregnancy has the potential to cause harm to the developing embryo or fetus. Next slide, please. And this is probably the slide that most of you'll go away and remember. So this is obviously, we've got the child on the left, that's the unexposed to alcohol. This is what a child's skull and brain should look like. And then on the right, this is obviously a very extreme example, but you can see the difference in the anatomy of the child on the right. So the skulls are completely different shape. You've got far more of the black area around the brain there. That's fluid. That's where the brain should be, but there's fluid instead. You can see the brain's a lot smoother. It's less developed, and because it doesn't have the little folds, capacity, surface area, and actually the structure isn't there. The structure isn't as developed as it should be. So your neurons and your synapses are not developed properly, and they're not connected properly either. So there's no wonder that the child on the right would behave differently and have different learning abilities to the child on the left, where the brain's fully developed, fully connected or wired up, if you like. Next slide, please. So, like we say, FASD is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. It's associated with 400 conditions, and they can range from a whole host of physical health conditions, which we alluded to, like there could be heart defects, hearing problems, eye problems, etc., etc. There's also a lot of it's very common to have a severe difficulty with movement and coordination, because if you imagine those neurons, those synapses aren't working properly, the coordination for these children is a lot more tricky than children who haven't been exposed to alcohol. They struggle with comprehension, particularly social rules and expectations. They find that really hard to cotton on to what's normal, what's acceptable behaviour, and Maria and Claire will talk about that in a bit more detail. A classic behaviour is impulsive behaviours. That is really common, and that causes lots of problems. They can be easily overwhelmed and overstimulated. They can be hyperactive, which is why a lot of these children may be misdiagnosed as ADHD instead. The working memory is often quite poor, and their inhibitory control is very reduced as well. So we've got the average brain's little picture here on the left with the filing cabinet all neat and tidy, and you can get the information that you want, you can retrieve it as required. And then you've got the FASD brain on the right, which is like an explosion, and it's chaotic. And it's just a little, gives you a bit of an insight as to how the brains are very different and how these children are struggling to organise their mind that's basically a bit of an explosion going on. So we have to be really mindful that these children are not naughty, but it's actually brain damage. And in the past, these children will have experienced a lot of issues at school, etc., and being labelled as naughty, but they're not. It literally is brain damage. So it's really important that they have early diagnosis and appropriate support as soon as possible to give them the best chances of a good outcome. Next slide, please. So children with FASD struggle to learn in a timely and consistent fashion. There's no surprises that when there's bits of your brain aren't working properly, there's no surprise that that's the case. And we often find the more abstract the task, the more difficult it is for these children. So if we're looking at telling the time or managing money, that's quite an abstract, they're abstract concepts that they find quite difficult to grasp. And we also notice that the learning gap becomes much greater as the children get older. So when the kids are 4 or 5 in a classroom, the behaviours may not be that different to their peers, but as they get older and the other children sort of develop and mature, the children with FASD are left behind a little bit, and it becomes more obvious the older they get. There's a lot of information in this in Maria's book, which I've got a picture of here. I highly recommend that if anybody wants to read around this a little bit further. So problems understanding instructions is classic. You know, you can explain something to children, excuse me, to these children, you've got to be very explicit. You have to be very exact and give short, simple instructions to these children. So it wouldn't just be like, let's get ready and go out to play. It'd be like, okay, go and get your coat on, pop your hat on, and then we're going to go outside, and keep it really specific and clear what the instructions are, what you expect from that child. These children struggle with friendships and social interactions because they're not really aware necessarily of what normal behaviour is like, about ownership and a personal space, all the subtleties of social interactions. They just don't quite grasp it always. So there's no wonder that leads to difficulties with school or work environments. Organising themselves is a struggle. So particularly at secondary school, when they've got different activities at different times in the timetable, that can be really hard for these children to remember where they're meant to be going, what they need, what they should have brought with them. So that can be a challenge. And I think one of the golden threads I hear from lots of families is poor sleep. That is a nightmare for parents and the children. So often they don't need an awful lot of sleep, and that can be killing for parents and carers. Very, very tiring, and tiring for the children as well. If they're not getting enough sleep, that is making everything a lot worse. So that seems to be a key factor. So it's no wonder, really, given all of that, that they struggle to concentrate and focus on whatever task they've been given, whether that's at school or at home or whatever. Next slide, please. I've just put this little illustration on. I don't expect you to read it. It's just showing you a very quick overview of how there's many overlapping behavioural characteristics between FASD, between autism, between ADHD, and trauma. Children living with trauma as well. So it just gives you a bit of an insight as to why these children are often misdiagnosed with something else. They maybe have comorbidities, but it just makes it that bit more complex, I think, when clinicians are diagnosing these children. Next slide, please. So this diagram is based on a jelly bean diagram that was drawn by Maria, and it just simplifies, I think, and illustrates how somebody of an actual age of 18 who has FASD will obviously be physically mature. They'll be looking exactly like an 18-year-old. Their expressive language could be very good. They're often very developed with expressive language, and maybe 20 or over the chronological age, be very, very good with the talk, if you like. Reading ability 16, that's fine, that's okay. I think a son reader's something like 8, so that's absolutely fine. But when you look at comprehension, social skills, money, time concepts, these children or these adults at 18 have the age of 8, 7, 6 for some of these social skills, and yet we would expect these children at 18 to perhaps be leaving care and living independently, and yet their comprehension and social maturity would be a 6-year-old. So you can see why these adults become quite problematic, are very vulnerable. And we'll talk about that a bit later on. And obviously, even living skills at 11, would you let an 11-year-old have a flat and manage themselves independently? You wouldn't. So these are some of the issues that develop from this cohort of children and young people. Next slide, please. So prevalence rate. So I think this is the bit that's quite shocking. So we've got alcohol exposed pregnancies at over 40%. So we've got a gold standard study. This was published in 2021. So that was the University of Salford. And it was actually quite a conservative finding at 3.6% prevalence rate here, because a lot of the children that they were high risk, the parents didn't actually consent for them to be part of the study. So their prevalence rate here at 3.6%, that would mean one child in every classroom potentially would have FASD in the UK, which is a staggering amount of children. They also popped in their report, they highlighted that most people with FASD are unrecognised, undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And there was actually, excuse me, an older study than that back in 2019 where, excuse me, there was tens of thousands of children in a longitudinal study were diagnosed for FASD presentations, and they had up to 17% of that cohort presented with FASD symptoms, if you like. So that it was between 6 or 17%, depending on how you analyse the data. But it was a significant proportion, and that was in the Bristol area. Next slide, please. Excuse me for coughing as well. So in 2022, we had the NICE quality standard. So it's not a guideline, it's a standard, which means that we have to have regard for quality standards and report on progress in improving care on this this level of NICE standard. Excuse me. And it basically covers advice on avoiding alcohol in pregnancy. It looks at prenatal alcohol exposure. It looks at the best ways of referring for assessment. It gives advice on neurodevelopmental assessment. And it also emphasises the importance of a management plan, which is absolutely crucial for this cohort. Next slide, please. And now sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. We know that diagnosis is invaluable for this cohort. We know that this is actually Canadian data because there isn't any British data yet studied, but that we know that the FASD people are the highest users of the care system, and that early intervention is really, really important for this cohort. We know that 25% of adopted FASD children are handed back because the parents and carers haven't been made aware of the challenges involved. They maybe haven't received the support required to manage some of these children's behaviours. We know that 60% have a history of trouble with the law. And, when we go back to the lack of inhibition, behaviours, the failing to learn from experience, like children not exposed to alcohol usually do, there's no surprise that there's a higher incidence of involvement with youth offending, etc. And there's been studies done in Canada where they estimate 50% of the prison population have FASD symptoms. There's actually been a UK study, again, the University of Salford, that's found that people with FASD are 19 times more likely to be arrested, 19 times more likely to be charged, and 19 times more likely to be convicted in the criminal justice system. And that's partly because they tend to just agree to anything. When they're asked questions, they will just say, yes, I did it, I committed that crime, because they don't understand the consequences of the full enormity of the situation that they find themselves in. Now, this is really old data now, 2013. The cost of FASD to the Canadian economy at $1.8 billion. That's over 10 years old. So we can only begin to imagine what it is costing the UK economy in 2025. And we also know that siblings have an 80% chance of FASD as well. So that's something to bear in mind when we're managing these children and their families. Next slide, please. So without intervention, these children and adults are at much higher risk of comorbidities. And I've rearranged this slide just to sort of look at the impact on services as well, because it really is cost effective to manage these children as soon as possible and appropriately. So we know that mental illness is a concern for this cohort. So these children end up in our CAMS, on our ND pathway, diagnostic, waiting list. They can end up in crisis. And we know that these children are at a high risk of suicide as well. They struggle with schooling, so they're more likely to be suspended from school or expelled from school. So that has a huge impact on our education systems and alternative provision. And a lot of these children end up homeschooled as well because they just can't cope with the school situation. We've got trouble with law enforcement, so I put the youth offending service in there. They can be victims or perpetrators of sexual abuse, because when you think of the mental age, it doesn't always equate. They're very vulnerable. We've got abuse of alcohol and other substances. There's a lot of work around how children, or babies in utero can actually have more of an affinity and crave some of the alcohol or substances that they were exposed to in utero as well. So this is quite a new emerging area of research which I'm monitoring with interest. But there is a close association with FASD young people and adults actually in our addiction services too. So they struggle with living independently. Excuse me, so that affects our housing, social care, and a lot of these individuals will be homeless as well. Obviously, employment's really difficult. If you struggle with the time, you can't get to work on time, you struggle with buses, getting organised, etc. Maintaining employment can be really difficult. So that has an impact on work and pensions, on benefit systems, and these individuals will again end up in food banks, etc. And it's really common for early or unwanted pregnancy or paternity, and that has a huge impact on our maternity services, on gynae services, on our health visitors, social care, and some will be involved with safeguarding as well. So there's huge implications for this cohort. Next slide, please. So the positives, so there are lots of strengths, lots of positives in this cohort, and we have a lot of FASD advocates across the country. And actually, if these children are supported properly, get an early diagnosis, have plans that are relevant for them and really appropriate, these children and adults can live very, very positive and productive lives, but we really need to support them to do that. Often they have amazing skills that we need to build on and use a strengths-based approach for this cohort as well. And some areas that they excel in can be the sport, the arts, and we try and focus them more towards vocational occupations often because they're just better suited. They might be really good working with animals, being outdoors, building work. They can be very creative. So there's lots of positives that we can focus these children and young people on when perhaps mainstream school might not be the most appropriate area for them to get their education. And I've put, I think the next slide is a whole host of resources that you can learn more about FASD and get lots of insight, whether you're a teacher, social worker, nurse, midwife, and anybody else. There's lots of information on there that you can find out lots more about FASD. So I think that's my section. I've probably not done too badly for time. So thank you, everybody, and I'm very happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. I can see that we already have lots and lots of questions coming through the chat, so I'm sure our Q&A is going to be really, really interesting. Some stark statistics there, and really getting us thinking about FASD. Going to hand over to Maria Catrick now, who is, as I said before, the founder and director of FASD Network UK. And Maria is going to provide us with more of a regional context. So how is FASD impacting in the North East and North Cumbria? So welcome, Maria, and over to you.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Helen, for a great presentation. You summarised all the things I normally have to talk about, but you did it so brilliantly. What a great start. So I'm Maria Catrick from the FASD Network, and my journey started with FASD about 20 years ago as a foster carer, and our service started about 14 years ago, and we're the FASD specialist organisation in the region. We've connected with thousands of FASD families and many thousands of practitioners too across the sectors. So while I might have my own personal journey, this particular slot that I'm doing is sharing what our families and practitioners are experiencing as a collective across the regions. Claire will come on after me and do an absolutely fantastic job of telling her personal story to really show what it looks like as lived experience. You'll see I've popped a QR code on the screen, and that's to access loads and loads of free resources that are all sitting on the website that you can use following the session. I know some people are already asking about resources. So next slide, please. if I was to create a summary statement, just say it in one go, what it is that families are experiencing, it would be this, that FASD families are searching for a place to fit in. And I've got some statements here just to give you the full picture. If society is largely unaware of the risks of prenatal alcohol exposure, then FASD continues to occur. Click. When FASD occurs, families are looking to services for information, practical support, and advocacy. I'll underline advocacy. Next. But when health education and social care practitioners are unaware of FASD or of best practice, then families can find themselves struggling and having to fight and advocate to obtain a diagnosis and meaningful support. Click. And when practitioners try to provide a service, and you know what, I've met the most amazing practitioners with a lot of passion for our families, but many have to decline as FASD doesn't hit the criteria or thresholds, or they're not commissioned to do so. So I think this slide summarises the landscape that we're absolutely sitting in at the current time. Next slide. So there's going to be a lot of clicks on this slide. I'm going to give you what we're seeing that are really great. And, you know, I've been around this field for 20 years and things are changing. We have positives to celebrate, and the army of amazing parents parenting our kids are seeing some amazing things happening. But it's also counterbalanced with the challenges. So, you know, if we consider the landscape, we've definitely got celebration points that I really think are often undersold as well. We're so busy talking about what's not going well. So if we click the first one, you know, since 2016, Helen highlighted that the Chief Medical Officer communicated a no alcohol in message ruling, but challenge is that there's no national TV and media awareness campaign for this. If you go in a pub or purchase alcohol in a supermarket, there are no posters warning of the dangers of alcohol exposure, and we haven't any messages in public places. It's not fully embedded in the PSHE school curriculum. So it's getting there, but it's not there. Next one. Nice quality standards have been established. Woohoo, March 2022. We thought this was the landmark change. And it outlines the duty of care and services required for people with FASD. However, we're nearly 3 years in and they have not been implemented. It is stalling. Next one. We now have proactive maternity processes that were highlighted brilliantly, where people are asked about their alcohol use and it's recorded, and the support systems for women who are drinking, and that is great progress. We are celebrating all of that. However, that information doesn't always follow the child's records, and in the Northeast we have new babies born every day exposed to alcohol. We aren't winning this one yet. And in this region, we have some of the largest sibling groups all affected by prenatal alcohol exposure. I'm hearing of 10s and 12s and 13s all affected, all siblings born still subsequently alcohol exposed. I think we've got a bit more room to manoeuvre here. Next. Some areas offer a diagnosis. Oh my goodness, years ago when we couldn't get a diagnosis at all, everybody was frustrated. To have a child that needs a diagnosis and no one to diagnose it was so frustrating. And we've met amazing paediatricians who have worked so hard to develop the skills and knowledge to support families. It's been amazing. And I cannot start to tell you the difference a diagnosis makes for the child to understand themselves, for services to understand the child, for the family to parent differently, and for us to identify this 400 plus potential physical and health impacts. So if we don't diagnose it, we're sometimes missing all of those. So that's great. However, some areas don't offer diagnosis. And I think in some ways, we've got even more challenges because the nice quality standards came out. So some of the paediatricians have put on hold the diagnosis because it's not commissioned and they're waiting for the pathways to be developed, and they haven't been. So we're actually in a worse situation at the current time than we have been even a few years ago. I mean, we do need to celebrate the Northeast as well. There was a clinic set up in Sunderland by a paediatrician, the lovely Dr. Sarah Mills, who said, we just need to do something. And she won national awards for that. So we've got things to celebrate in our region. And I guess my reflection would be if we turned around and said to families of children with ADHD, sorry, we haven't got a budget. We're not going to offer you a service. we're just going to stop it there. You don't need a diagnosis. You don't need anything. Just carry on life as normal. There would be an absolute outcry. But that's what we've done with FASD. We've left them sitting with nothing. So surely this is the time for an outcry. Next. It is fantastic that there's an increasing awareness of the term FASD. When I first started, everybody used to say, FASD, what's that? Don't understand that. What does that mean? So the baby, what? And they couldn't just get their head around it. We now see most people go, oh yes, FASD, I've heard of that. So we're definitely making progress. So delighted even for the Huddle today to keep that awareness going. But what we're seeing in practice is that some practitioners still remain unaware of the condition or how to adapt their services or their classrooms to accommodate most effectively. Some of the universal offers aren't particularly working. So we're getting there, but not quite. Keep going. Workforce development. This is imperative. If we don't know what it is or don't know how to understand FASD and what to do about it, there's a real challenge. And I've been delivering workforce development for many years, and places like Gateshead, it's probably been 10 years of going in, and it's just on a roll-on, roll-off program. You really see the impact on the ground when people have had workforce development training. However, some areas have absolutely nothing. It's inconsistent across the region, and we need that consistency up. This absence of training influences sort of recognition and understanding and tailoring of services. So let's keep going with the training. Next. What is fantastic is we do have universal services, you know, family hubs, early help, safeguarding, and they accept FASD families because it's a universal service and it's inclusive. But sometimes we're finding that standard parenting courses and standard initiatives may be given to families that aren't sufficiently tailored, and especially tailored to the complexity that some of our children can present with. So it feels as though there's no specialist system out there. We're relying on universal services to really understand and accommodate. Next, we've got CAMS and SIP services exist, again, universal access for those. But we're finding that families with FASD are sometimes bouncing around between services. Oh, let's send you to SIPs. Oh, well, we don't deal with that. Send you back to children with disabilities teams. Oh, we don't. And it just feels like there's a whole bounce going on. And there's still a discussion about whether FASD is a mental health condition or a disability. And sometimes it's that even deciding where you end up sitting in a service. I would suggest FASD can be all three, not particularly one. And finally, we know that the Department for Health and Social Care and NICE quality standards have finally raised the bar to address FASD and ensure it's no longer optional. And this is the point. While there's been lots of meetings and discussions and pathway planning, it's not there on the ground. It has not been implemented. And here we are sort of 3 years later, and there's not equity of services or equality of services. There are some conditions get priority access, and this is not one of them. So I guess to summarize, there's every reason to be positive and hopeful. Change is happening, and there's every reason to continue to advocate, because it's not happening fast enough. It's not happening thoroughly enough and universally enough yet. So next slide. Very simplistic diagram, isn't it? And it's just reminding us that some things aren't going to be rocket science when it comes to FASD. You'll see these interlocking circles, and we know that that creates the most resilience. If we can get home and family life secure and safe, and the child supported well in education, and they're positively connected in the community, things can be pretty stable. We can have a pretty decent life here. But we also have to attend to the prevention. You see on the side, prevention, diagnosis, support and services to underpin all of that. And we're not just talking about birth families. We've got some very complex families, you know, foster, adoptive, kinship, children living in residential care. So it's not a one size fits all with a parenting program, because that's not all equal. Majority of our kids are not living with their birth parents. And really, to make that all stable and work, you'll see the sort of sectors at the bottom: education, health, disability, social care, mental health and justice. They all need to be up to speed with accommodating of their services. And to do that, they need awareness training and often commissioning. if they're not commissioned, they say, well, if we're not commissioned, we won't do anything because we can't. And so I think they're the blocks. But there's no surprise there, is there, about what makes a really good support system for our families. So what are we going to do? We've talked about what's going on as a collective across the region. What do we know needs to happen to have really good input? And what's it going to take? And it's going to take systems change. And we're going to there's so many times we could just sit back and wait for somebody else to enact change, but it's just delaying things. We can just each do something, make a small change today, and it hopefully will inspire others to join in. Because one day, I'm going to guarantee you, one day we're going to look back and say, look at what we've achieved together. Look how far we've come. And there's a few families who signed up to the FASD Challenge 2025. And so you might see them a bit more vocal, coming out to you and saying, so are you going to accommodate FASD? Are you helping us? They're coming in with a polite challenge to say, come on, let's integrate the services, make sure that they're fit for our families. So they're going to do it gently. And we're seeing loads of practitioners signing up saying, come on, let's all work together and create that systems change. So next slide, please. This is the summary of the kinds of changes that you all attending today have the power to do something about. You know, while we wait for massive changes, we can do the smaller changes. So let's communicate those prevention messages. This is a preventable condition. Please do me out of a job. Have no more children and families coming through with FASD. I'll be delighted. I'll be the happiest person ever. We can prevent this. It won't be 100% preventable because we have unplanned pregnancy. So we have to go back to what are we doing about birth control? And we have to go back to what are we saying in schools to help with prevention. But I would be saying for your service, what are you doing as a practitioner, as a school, whoever you are today in this meeting? What are you doing to make sure we're preventing FASD? You have the power to influence that. Saving a life. See, not many places you go to, you could actually literally save a life. And there you have it. Undertake training on FASD. We know that's good practice for any job we do. Please make sure you keep up to date. It is twice as common statistically as autism. And there's so much compulsory training and rollout of all sorts of information about autism. If you haven't given equal attention to FASD, then you have an unbalanced awareness and service and system. And if you work with foster adoptive kinship or residential staff, you especially have to know, make it core learning, because these are the children you are going to be meeting with FASD most commonly. Screen for FASD, you know, when we talk to health visitors and some of the early years people, they might see subtle signs and symptoms, some traits of perhaps autism or ADHD, and so they start them down the pathways to those. Make sure that you're thinking FASD as well, because it often has traits that look like those other conditions. So make sure it's on your radar so that we're not sending people down pathways that might be taking 4 and 5 years and we've missed a real opportunity to get the right need identified earlier. Key one, include FASD and eligibility criteria. We look at systems and services and it looks like there's a lot available, but when you try to go through the doorway, families are getting turned back left, right and centre saying, oh no, it's not eligible, you can't hit the criteria, or your child's got an IQ of 71, therefore they can't have a service. Whatever it is, there's lots of barriers. So think about your own services. You know, are your services open to FASD? Are they tailored to FASD? And if not, what are you going to do about it? Who can you challenge? Can you take it up the chain and make sure that they are included? Some of the commissioning's been traditional from the CCG times of services only for people with a learning disability and or autism. So we either need to drop the word autism and make it something generic so all are included, or we keep adding FASD alongside those learning disability, autism and FASD. We've got to do something different because the existing language and barriers are not helpful at all. And some of the very worst life outcomes are what we're seeing if we don't get it right. And I guess those life outcomes, if things go wrong, what we're seeing from feedback from families and professionals is families are disrupting, children are shuttling through multiple foster homes or moving into very expensive residential care. We're seeing kinship carers struggling to care for multiple grandchildren. You know, someone was in her 70s with 5 children with FASD. a lot. Who's expecting that to be working well? We see high levels of child-to-parent violence, criminal justice engagement. We've got kids in prison right now. Grooming is very common, exploitation, going missing. There's even podcasts out there from a young person with FASD who's gone missing from the day after her 18th birthday. Children constantly excluded or out of school for years due to lack of the correct approach or provision. You know, there's specialist provisions, but there isn't anything particularly specialist for FASD. Education is a huge issue. But when we see families thriving, and there is a lot of thriving, Helen talked about the gifts and talents, getting that early diagnosis, getting that early support, and a real nurturing of gifts and talents. And we've got people in national sort of sporting teams really making their way in the world. We've got people who've been on TV, you know, just everything to aim for. So let's get the accommodations right. Let's sure that we make sure that all sectors have reasonable adjustments, that legislation of reasonable adjustments. I know that there'll be commissioners here, and I know I'm like a stuck record, but we have to have commissioning and the implementation of nice quality standards. We can't go around this. We're at a logjam. We've paused because we're waiting for something to happen, and that families have been waiting over 50 years. This is not a new kid on the block diagnosis. It's been a diagnosable condition since 1973. I think it's time. This is our year to really shake things up and move things forward. And just a couple of extra things that are, I guess, the points that are having the most trouble, and that's supporting transitions to adulthood. You saw Helen's diagram of what's happening around age 18, the vulnerability. That's where a massive amount of difficulties are happening. So think about, you know, have we, you can't get a diagnosis 18 plus, because at the current time it's only paediatricians diagnosing. So we need, if there's anybody in adult psych here passionate about FASD, step up. You can diagnose in adulthood. We want you. We've been waiting for you. And we need those assessments to transition successfully to adulthood, you know, making sure they've got cognitive assessments, adaptive functioning assessment, mental capacity assessments, needs assessments. Getting that right there is so crucial to have the success that they have a right to. They have permanent brain-based impairments through no fault of their own, and they're deserving of our very best efforts to have the life that they so richly deserve. And consider those multiple complex needs. You know, it's not just one thing. It's usually a package of things that need support all at the same time. So we definitely have people with obviously physical disabilities, mental health needs, addictions, and criminal justice involvement all at the same time. And you can bounce around. You can't get your mental health needs set because you've got a drug or alcohol issue, or do you know what I mean? It just keeps going backwards and forwards. So we aren't finding that cohesive, really supportive system through quite yet. So if you're someone who works in that sector, please have another go. Let's see what else we can do differently. And I think finally, refer families to us. You know, I hear of many of you supporting families, and we're not to take them away from you. That's not what that's about. But we are working nationally and with researchers and other FASD hubs to try and look at patterns and what's happening across different regions. And so we need that surveillance. We need the information. We need that knowledge. And, you know, we can connect our families to over 4,500 families to speak to all day, every day, and to attend support groups. So please do signpost them onto us. There's even a registration form on the website, or just pick up the phone and ring. And final slide. Just wanted to thank you for coming. You have the power to create change, whoever you are, whatever your role is. I hope I've triggered some thoughts there about what could be changed or adapted to really accommodate people with FASD well while we're waiting for commissioning, as well as after commissioning. And I've left the QR code on there again in case you missed it the first time, in case you want some free resources and information. You can just look at them on the website. So that's from me. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Maria. Such interesting information, and kind of building on from what Helen has told us, and really, really interesting topic. We are going to take a short comfort break now. So on my screen, it's 11:04. So if we can have everyone back on, if you just mute yourself and turn your camera off, and then it speeds up that process so we don't have to let everyone in again. And if we can be back ready to start to hear from Claire at 11:10, please.
Hello, is there anybody there?
I'm on a.
Hiya, I'm not getting the slides at all on the screen. I don't know whether that's because I'm
don't
not
know.
in NHS.
I don't know, because we've got quite a lot of attendees from different organisations.
I'm not
Oh,
I'm not NHS either, and I'm getting them fine.
you're getting
Yeah,
them.
I'm getting them
Okay,
up,
thanks,
yeah.
Claire.
So I think, but I did have to do a little bit of clicking around on my Teams to be able to get them, because they were in a tiny corner in the left hand side. So I don't know. Have you tried? If you click on View, and if you click on
Yeah,
Focus on done that.
want to focus on. I see that's
Yeah.
blacked out on mine.
Okay.
So I
Tell
think
you
it
what,
must be the
Monica.
version of Teams you're in.
Yeah, what I'll do, Monica, is I'll PDF them and send them across, because it's quite a
Oh,
big
that's
file.
fantastic.
Is that all
Yeah,
right? And
that'll be great, and then I can follow on my screen. That'd be brilliant. Thank you. Appreciate
no problem.
it.
It's all right, because everyone will get them with the recording, but you'll
Yeah.
get first access.
Yay! Thank you.
I'll send them
It's
now.
really interesting. It's really,
Yeah.
I'm finding it really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Amelia, can I just quickly check how long have I got?
I think you've got about 10 minutes, Claire.
That's fine. It's fine. I could
I'll
talk
just
for
check.
5 minutes, an hour. I just need to know what to tailor it.
I think,
I've been
yeah,
looking at some of the questions, and I'm going to try and, because I don't have any slides or anything, I'm going to try and dip into some of those questions. I've been making a few notes, but I just wanted to know how long I had. That's fine. I'll set myself a timer.
Great. Claire Adele will update you with the timings when she comes back on.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Claire, would it be helpful if I sort of put the slide on to introduce yourself, and then I can take the slides down so you're
Yes.
sort of in the front? Yep, no problem.
Yes, please. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone's fully refreshed and managed to nip to the loo and grab a cuppa. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce to you Claire Devaney Glynn. Claire is going to talk to us around the voice of the family and that lived experience. So welcome, Claire. Thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Touching a little bit on what Maria said. Even just a few years ago, it would have been like my wildest dream to think there was going to be an NHS huddle about FASD, because it was just, me and my children just lived in the dark constantly and nobody knew what was going on with us. So very briefly, I will absolutely hold my hands up and say I did not set out to adopt 3 children with irreversible lifelong brain damage. I'm not that good of a person, but my now ex-husband and we did set out to adopt a family group, and we thought we'd add to our family biologically, because adoption was our first choice, and we were whizzed through the process, and it was the case in my local authority that they did know what was going on with my children, but they hid it and they misled us because they think people aren't going to adopt. So I adopted my two babies from one local authority, and they're full siblings, and then my daughter from a neighbouring local authority, because birth mother had kind of fled the area to conceal the pregnancy because she so desperately wanted to love our babies, but she just wasn't able to. She wasn't well enough to do that. So for a long time, and the analogy that I use is I thought that I had adopted 3 shiny green apples, my perfect, beautiful babies, because they are 17, 19 and 20 now. That makes us feel physically sick because I'm only 25, so I don't know how that correlates at all. And what I didn't know is I'd been given 3 little hand grenades disguised as shiny green apples, and I didn't know that I was doing everything wrong, and I was literally risking our lives on a daily basis by trying to parent in a neurotypical, I'm from a huge family, reward and recognition, naughty step, all of this, and wondering why none of it was working with my 3. So I was nearly 10 years into our adoption before I seen an infograph on Pinterest, an American infograph with the very stereotypical facial features and a little list of these are some of the symptoms. And I thought, oh my God, this is mine. And I am probably guilty of this. I then started to wade through all of my adoption paperwork again, because I was very naive, and I believed that professionals wouldn't lie. And so we were whizzed through in less than 8 months, which in hindsight is crazy. But I thought, oh, this is fantastic. But it was like, oh my God, she'll take these kids. And that was the reality of it. And I have spoken to some now retired social workers who were around at the time, and that actually was the reality. They were like, this is because I had a huge support network, and because adoption was our first choice. So, and I'm very rare. I'm like a unicorn in the FASD world, because our diagnosis was effortless. We got it like that. And in hindsight now, I realise that's because the professionals surrounding us were just waiting to see if I sussed it out. We were just waiting to see, is she gonna say anything? And GP, I rang the GP, can you bring them down now, the same day? Because I just need to be in the same room as them to be able to refer to paediatrics. Got to paediatrics, right, I can't diagnose this, but I know that is what's going on. So we went to the Centre for Life at the time at Newcastle, and a geneticist diagnosed us there. Again, effortlessly. I had to do some blood tests to rule out anything genetic, but all of the evidence was there. And so, kind of touching on a couple of the questions, that was then what? Okay, we've got a diagnosis now. What? Absolutely nothing, really. Nothing in one sense, but then it changed me, it changed my tolerance, my understanding. I then started to learn. I've probably done the equivalent of about 5 degrees now on FASD and trauma and attachment, because I know there's a few things in the questions as well that when it comes to care experienced kids, it's really easy for everyone to just say it's trauma and attachment. And trauma and attachment is massive, and it will impact everyday life. It will, as well as this. But imagine, when you've got this huge mixture going on.
And I'm also very aware that I have always had a get out of jail card, in that nobody has ever judged me for my children having FASD, and that's a big, big deal. And that has allowed me to be able to, I know that I am not going to be judged. I have been in a couple of situations where a consultant, a dermatologist actually, when I was trying to find out why my daughter's hair was falling out, because everything leads back to FASD, everything with the physical stuff, gynae problems, because of her FASD, my daughter, when she was age 13, she bled solidly for 2 years. 2 solid years. Imagine that. That's her teenage years destroyed, and nothing would work. And we know it's linked to her FASD, but the research isn't there yet. In 15 years' time, it will be, and we'll know exactly why that happened. But it's just not there now. But that's her life destroyed. That's her teenage years destroyed. And I think I know I haven't got very long, and I could talk about this all day. But what I would say is my kids' mental health has been impacted more. It's been harmed more by our services than it ever was by their start in life and their birth parents. And that's unforgivable, and that's something that we really, really can avoid. Kids like mine don't fit anywhere. We fall through every single gap, and I'm pretty capable, and I am pretty good at advocating for my kids, but they were all still out of secondary education for nearly 3 years because nothing existed, and I wouldn't allow them to be in a situation that was harmful. I wouldn't allow it, and nothing existed. Then COVID happened, and it was like, it was the best thing that ever happened to us as a family, because we didn't have to try and stick to this norm that the kids couldn't do. So I think I know I've got a very short space of time, but I want to get it across that diagnosis is vital, absolutely vital, just for the understanding of it. And I know in one of the questions, that my kids, I thought they were going to be devastated when they were old enough for me to explain what was going on with them. They were actually really relieved. My eldest son said, "Oh, that's good. I thought I had dementia like Nana Gladdy." Like, just to be able to explain to him what was going on, because, one little example with him, with FASD, with the memory problems, when he was able to manage school, he would, there'd be something in his maths book that he had done. It was his writing, he'd done it. And then he would sit down to follow on the next maths lesson, and he absolutely couldn't remember. He could not remember how to do it, and it terrified him, but he would get punished. Our education system, as it stands, tries to discipline the brain damage out of our FASD kids, and it just doesn't work. We're just funneling them directly to the judicial system. And every single person on this huddle can make a massive impact, bigger than you could ever dream, just by having this knowledge and just saying, "Oh, hang on a minute, you could be in a meeting about a young person. No, that might not be the best thing." There's no rushing ahead with the systems that are going to be in place. They will be there eventually, and it's frustrating that they're not. I'm a member of the NICE panel that created the quality standards, and I remember when we were creating them, I was so excited, thinking, this is it. Everything's going to change now. And Roger Mukherjee, who is a global leader on FASD, certainly a UK leader, he said this is going to take about 10 years to really, really make a difference. And I was thinking, no, that can't possibly be, but it's looking like it is. And I think that's something that's so frustrating, but on a basic level, you are all able to have a massive impact. Certainly those of you who link with education is the key. I remember being given the statistics around life expectancy and FASD, and there are some that are pretty brutal, but they're quite extreme. But on the whole, life expectancy with FASD is not great. And that is a direct result of disengagement with education, and then where life goes after that, suicide, and then, drug and alcohol misuse. So education is the key to it all. And our education system, as it stands now, it's totally unfit for purpose for FASD kids. We can either have mainstream and primary settings. You can kind of support to a very different way in a primary setting. Once you get to secondary, it's make or break for them. And the only other alternative is an SAMH school, and that's not particularly the right setting either for kids like ours. So it's so hard. And my kids, like I say, missed out on most of their education, but my daughter has just got a full-time apprenticeship at a nursery because her strength, and it's like a superhuman strength, is nurturing and caring. She can't walk into a shop on her own. But if she had a baby on her hip, she could do anything. She could literally stop traffic. She could do anything with a baby on her hip, or a baby in a pushchair, or just somebody more vulnerable than her. That's her strength. And you know, she looks, and again, going back to the stuff that Maria was talking about, the infographic that Maria had made, she looks like a 25-year-old Instagram model, which makes her really, really vulnerable, because, you know, she's doing some trial days at the nursery at the minute, and I have to sit outside for 30 minutes so that she can keep going back to one window to check that I'm still there in that parking space. And then when I pick her up, I have some warm milk, like in a sippy cup, for her to kind of regulate herself. And, you know, so it might look like, oh, that's brilliant, tick, she's able to access an apprenticeship, fantastic. I'm having to give her the support of a child half her age for her to be able to function. My middle boy is just about level 3, trained as a mechanic, extraordinary. Driving is his passion because of his FASD and his trauma. He's got like reptilian reflexes. So he's a fantastic driver. He's actually navigated in a rally car, in a real rally. I actually thought I was going to die of a heart attack that day, but he did it, and like he did it effortlessly. But again, he couldn't get on a bus, he couldn't attend an appointment, hasn't been to a dentist for probably 8 years. You know, so they've got extraordinary skills, which if you're able to, and quite often it's so difficult trying to keep them alive and trying to parent them, let alone, I mean, you notice I don't say try and keep them happy, it's trying to keep them alive. That it's hard for you to sometimes stop and celebrate the massive achievements that they do have. But somebody had mentioned in the questions about, you know, can things change? Can things improve? And when I learned quite a bit about epigenetics, because I have had to become an expert on my kids, because nobody, like, you know, I've only just started to enter rooms where I'm not the person who knows the most about FASD, and that, like, I've been dying for that to happen. Like, I don't want, it's not like a flex or anything. I don't want to know. I want to be able to sit back and someone go, right, I'm going to help you with this. Like, that's all I've longed for 17 years now. But my daughter, when she was really struggling with primary school, she kept saying she just wanted to blow her work up. And we thought, like, some kind of cartoon, like blow it up, get rid of it. She actually just meant make it bigger because she couldn't see, and it had been missed on her sight test at school. And we took her to the optician. She got referred to a specialist, and she was on 50% vision, and that was because her optic nerves had been damaged by the alcohol in utero. And I was devastated because that meant she was never going to be able to drive. And I just think that was something that I'd always longed for, this, to have our independence and to be able to have a lovely little car and drive. But she's now on 80% vision, because the things have improved, and I don't know the science behind it, but things have improved. And I know that I was always taught about use it or lose it when it comes to your brain. And I know that there's a lot of things that damages there absolutely forever. But I have noticed that there are things that my kids can do now that they really, really couldn't do before. So I think I have to be an eternal optimist, because I have to. It's so scary being on my own. So I've been on my own with them now for 10 years, being on my own with 3. I don't know if anyone's Game of Thrones fans, but I am a real life mother of dragon. Like, I literally live in a house with 3 dragons who are capable of killing me. Like, I adore them. I absolutely adore them. They're gorgeous. But I think my one thing that I would say to professionals is, I would appear to have a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 20-year-old. I'm not even going to start about transition to adult services. It is horrific, and it is devastating, and it is so harmful. But I'm not. My children need the level of care of a 7, 8, and 9-year-old. And that's what absolutely nobody takes into account. And I'm not being a helicopter parent. If I could drop kick them out of the house and say, get on with your day and then come back for tea, that would be my dream. And I'm so honest about that. But I've had to shape my every waking moment around them. At the minute, one of them has just gone to sleep after being awake for 33 hours. So when Helen touched on sleep being a little bit of an issue, like I literally wanted to scream. It is the biggest issue. Don't produce melatonin. They can't sleep. And they are the ones who are instantly related to school refusers. And I think I was one when we were trying to manage secondary school with my eldest, he kept getting negative marks because he was struggling in class, and one of the negative marks he was getting was to say he needed to show a little bit more resilience. A little boy who had been moved 8 times in foster care before he was 22 months old when I brought him home was told by a teacher that he needed to show more resilience. The fact that I wasn't arrested that day is a testament to my self-control. But I did get the system changed in the school, because I've said, how many care experience kids have you got? How many kids have you got living with grandparents? Like, how dare you say that they need more resilience? You've bought this package for a negative and a positive system to roll out into a school. You've got to consider the harm that it has. So yeah, I think it's such a bizarre one, because I know that my kids, two of them have definitely got ADHD as well. One of them possibly autism. And I used to be of the thought of thinking, well, does it really matter if because autism gets the support? We all know that. That's where the support lies. So does it really matter, if I just kind of stick with the autism bit? But autism and ADHD, they are neuro differences. This is organic brain injury. There's a massive, massive difference, and we have to treat it massively differently, especially for the, a lot of our, I don't know if anyone works with people within residential settings, works with staff who work in residential settings. The anger and the violence is absolutely massive. And honestly, I would say a huge part of that with FASD kids is they're in pain all the bloody time. They're in physical pain, muscles, joints, ankles, hips, teeth. They're used to this level of pain all the time because the calf muscles are probably, chances are, too short. Like, it's absolutely, once you get sucked down an FASD rabbit hole, you'll never come back out again. It's fascinating when you look at all of the physical symptoms as well. So I think that's the difference to a neuro, a neuro difference. It's way more than that. And I know somebody had asked a question about when, is it vital to get an FASD when you could sit with an ADHD or an autism diagnosis? And I think that's the reason, apart from the fact that, and it took me a while because, I am only human, and parenting, the tiptoe walking, Monica, yeah, absolutely. Sleep deprived. So sometimes I would be getting 40 minutes at a time, maybe 3 bouts of 40 minutes sleep during the night. For years, that's what I lived on. And so to be patient was really, really difficult. But I think when I learned about therapeutic parenting, and learned, and a lot of the time I would be acting, like I would put on a voice and I didn't mean it, and I'll be absolutely honest, because I just wanted to run away from my life because it was hideous. And I would put on a voice and use a certain tone of voice and use certain words, but like a nursery teacher, and like this, fake it until you really make it. Like that's what I was doing. And I used to have to kind of force myself to think, like, you can't be angry with them. They've got a brain injury. If they had have been in a car crash when they were 10 months old and suffered a brain injury, would you be getting angry with them? And I think this is when I certainly do deliver trauma training, that's one of the first things I ask, because there's a massive stigma around this from so many different angles, and I think that's what's sometimes people find it hard to talk to about. And I think a couple of people touched on the difficulty with birth families. Yeah, it's an absolute minefield. There's no getting away from the fact that it's really, really uncomfortable. It's not nice because of the blame and the stigma around it. But as professionals, you've got a chance to start and remove that stigma, and let's just normalize it. Be nurturing, be kind, because like Helen said, there's not a single person in the world sets out to harm the baby to the fact that they won't have any friends, they won't get invited to birthday parties, and they don't get to have a normal life. Nobody wants that for the kids. So we can make such a huge difference as professionals, because that's set in both camps. And our kindness and our compassion to the people who are living this and who are dealing with this can make all the difference. And I think you've got an opportunity. Sometimes you've all got massive caseloads and no money, and think how are we going to do it? But just your attitudes when you are talking to other people about it, that can start and make a huge change in our society. I don't know how long I've talked for. Adele, I don't know if I've gone over me.
Yeah, about
A little
15
bit over
minutes,
half.
but I
I
think
always do.
we've got lots of comments in the chat that everyone could listen all day, and so thank you so much, Claire.
Oh, my pleasure.
I think
Thanks for listening.
The kind of format of today's session has been really, really interesting, and finishing before our question and answers with your lived experience, I think just so powerful an impact for us all to think about.
And I didn't even get to mention that mattresses getting thrown down the stairs, doors ripped off. 38 doors I have replaced in my house. 38 doors. Can you imagine the financial situation that I'm in on my own? I've had to replace 38 doors, and I can't even admit to how many Xbox controllers, but I replace them, and I'll do anything to replace them, because this is not their fault. And that's not the time for a natural consequence. That's absolute bullshit. Their lives are hard enough. So yeah, I will stop now. I'll put myself on mute there. I'll mute myself.
Okay. Thank you so much, Claire. We've got tons of questions in the chat. Some of them we've already touched upon, but thank you. Lots of really positive comments coming through in the chat there, Claire. So we're going to try and address some of the questions. I know that we won't get through all of them, but just going to pick out. And our speakers, please just unmute yourself, jump in, and provide any answers that you want to. So the first one came from Beth right early on in the chat, and Beth says, "It's my understanding that FASD can't be cured, but I was wondering with neuroplasticity, and if these children were in supportive relationships, would they have any improvement?" And I know, Claire, you've just touched upon that. Do colleagues want to kind of come in and give any responses to that question?
Yeah, shall I start with that one? I've put in the chat actually that there is a growing body of research showing that as these young people get a little bit older, that the brains do start to, under the right conditions and the right support, the brains do start to compensate. So that's really positive and really hopeful. I haven't heard anything recently about that, but I'm presuming that that is still being studied intently. And yeah, just the right support, the early diagnosis, early intervention, and the right support can help prevent some of those 408 comorbidities that we spoke about. Every child is different, and every child will present with different traits and different issues and different strengths. But it's about getting that support in place, because if you, when you're listening to Claire's children, they know that they're not behaving the same as other kids in their class. They know that they haven't got the friends, they're not as popular as other children, and that has an impact on their self-esteem, on their mental well-being. So if you can get interventions in place to help them to manage that a little bit better, you might well be able to prevent them needing to go to CAMS, for example. If we find that they're really good at horse riding and they make some friends there and that boosts their self-esteem, for example, that can make a big difference. So it really is crucial that it's on everybody's radar, that all of us as professionals, whatever work stream we're working in, to be aware of it. Just have it on your radar, and don't just think, oh, it's autism, it's ADHD, or they're naughty children. that there's usually a problem behind it. And is it FASD? Think about it. It's really, it's more common than we give it credit for.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks so much. And I think the next one probably is going to come your way as well, Helen. So Garud Penny asked, how can we get a commissioned service for assessment and support? So we've been talking, all of our speakers have talked about that early diagnosis, so important. And I can see the threads coming through around some of the frustrations from professionals around that assessment and support. So who wants to jump in with that one?
Yeah, well, that's my life at the moment. I'm working in commissioning and trying so hard to get this highlighted and prioritised. There's a lot of work going on with ND pathways, which is great. And it's a starting point because we know there's no extra money. We know that there's not going to be any magical support come out of nowhere. So we've got to be resourceful. We've got to use the services and the funds that are there. We know that there's FASD children on ADHD waiting lists, on autism waiting lists, and they may be, you know, presenting with both, and that's fine, but we need to be more efficient. But the commissioning side is exasperating, and I'm hoping that some of the senior exec team from the ICB are listening to this now, so to really appreciate the impact of this service that we need for this cohort, because if we don't intervene and don't provide the services early on, if we don't prevent, this is going to cost a heck of a lot more than the cost of a FASD diagnostic service, which actually will be cheap compared to the expenses if we ignore this issue and pop our heads in the sand. So we need to look at prevention. That's what the long-term plan is saying in the NHS. It's about prevention. It's about keeping everybody well. It's about the best start in life. It's about addressing health inequalities. And these children and their families are facing health inequalities. Like Claire said, if you can't go to work because you've got to look after your children, you are instantly disadvantaged financially, and that incurs a whole raft of problems for your family. So we need to get the families the support they need, the children in the right places, and like we said, keep them in schools with the right support, or the right school. Mainstream school might not be the right place for them. They maybe need a class of 3 or 4 children. Maybe alternative provision is the right place for them. It depends on each child. But it's about getting it right for those children so they get the best start in life, because none of us want to handicap children through poor service delivery and poor commissioning. So we really need to overcome this and get this right for these children and for society. It's going to impact on everyone if we don't get this right. So yeah, we're trying.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you for all the work you're doing in that space, because as we know, so key. We'll move on to a question from Nicola Pitt now. And Nicola asks, if it is not known that a mother has drank during the pregnancy, and we've talked about some of that kind of stigma and prejudice around that area, how do we diagnose? And I think this is an interesting question, is FASD considered when children present for ADHD or autism assessment pathway?
Shall I go for that one as well? Feel free to jump in too. So I suppose the last part first, I don't think it necessarily is considered with ADHD and autism, but I'd like to see that happen. I would like to see anybody working in CAMS, in neurodiversity pathways, to be fully trained on all conditions and trauma-informed care, etc. So that they're aware, so that it's just something to think about, because I gave you the diagram in that slide showing the co-presentations of all these different conditions. It is, you know, a very complex system to manage as a clinician, so I appreciate that. Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
So it was around if it's not known that the mother has drank during pregnancy, how then do we pick up that diagnosis?
So that is tricky, and when we go back, when we think about 80% of our population drink, 50% of pregnancies aren't planned. When I speak to women as a midwife, I presume everyone's drunk, that they have drunk some alcohol at some point, and that's not in a condemning or patronizing way. That is just the door's open. I'm open for you to tell me. There's no judgment here. Just let me know. We can document it. That's the sort of tack I would recommend clinicians take. It's really important, if it is disclosed, to be documented, and I can't highlight that enough. In the NICE standards, it does say suspected alcohol, so that or probable alcohol use, which is really helpful, because the sign 156, I think, is about it's almost proven, but it isn't. It's the probable alcohol use. Now, most women, and I've done a lot of work into this, will not tell you that they've had alcohol. They just won't. They won't tell you they've had cocaine and the blood tests are positive, the urine tests are positive. They don't tell you these things, partly because midwives don't ask the right questions. Maybe they're not quite sure about what judgments will follow, what the impact will be. We don't have, unfortunately, we don't have CO monitors like we have for smoking. I wish we did. So we have the breathalyzer type thing for smoking, and that's a really accurate and sensitive resource we can use for smoking detection. If only we had something like that for alcohol, it would be wonderful. And that's what some of my research has looked at in the past, is the blood biomarkers. Because if we had a yes and no, we'd be able to manage these women a lot more, or be able to identify them first of all and give them the appropriate management. So it's tricky. There's a lot of ethics involved. And I think we just have to support them and ask the right questions, get to know these women, have really strong relationships with them, and get them so they trust us. And it's not about we're going to blame and shame. It's about we want this information so we can help you and help your children, because I work with a lot of birth mothers and they are desperate that clinicians ask the right questions, find out about this, and actually give women accurate advice and make it as clear that smoking is harmful and that alcohol's harmful too, to sort of level those two factors up, for example, because it is so important. So we've just got to get a grip of it and manage it a lot better than we have in the past. And I think just keep asking. We can always add that information into the notes later. So sometimes it might be the second or third meeting with a woman before she feels comfortable enough to trust her midwife or a GP with that information. So, but it's tricky.
Thank you, Helen. And as you say, a really tricky subject to navigate and those conversations. I know we've got a number of colleagues on the call from education settings, school settings, college settings, and all of our speakers have talked about the challenges in terms of our current education system and how that doesn't always support children with FASD. So we've got a couple of questions here, Maria and Claire. I don't know whether you two want to pick this up. So are there any support systems or agencies for education or schools to use, or any particular strategies to adopt? And then also a second question around, does anyone know of any good resources for teaching young people with FASD about their FASD?
Do you want to jump in, Claire, because you've got lots of thoughts about education?
Yeah, I think there's nothing that I've been able to find that's like, oh, this is brilliant. I've kind of, over the years, when my kids have started in any new education setting, I'll get on everyone's good side, be like, right, I'll train everyone for free, every individual member of staff who's going to have contact with me kids. But I know that I know, Maria, you will know about the training side of stuff way better than me, but there are, not that I could go into them now, but there are absolutely tons of things, strategies that can be put into place that are life-changing in school for kids. Tiny things that kind of, I don't know if anyone can still hear me because I've frozen.
Yeah. We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear us. Yeah, like really, really tiny things that a lot of teachers might think would not have a big impact, but can. So I kind of think of any, I don't know, I think because I've just kind of created it all for my kids myself. I know National FASD, Maria, have they got the for kids?
Yeah, National FASD have resources to help children understand themselves.
Yes.
So that if you have a look at that, that'll all pop up on their site. In terms of schools, a lot of the virtual schools have booked training, and so we're sort of hitting many schools that way at a time. And it's the small, subtle changes that add up to a really big life change for some of our children and keeps them in school. So yeah, plenty of options. On my website, there's loads of free resources for schools, and it's full of strategies. These are what you can do. If this is presenting, think about trying these things. Most of them are free. Most of them don't cost anything in terms of strategies. There is no specific FASD educational program itself. It's just accommodations, but they work brilliantly. And all the families will say the difference between a school that accommodates well and a school that doesn't. We've got a lot of children.
It could be something. Yeah, I was going to say, like, an example for one of my boys was at the end of the lesson where everyone was flying out to playtime. Can you just can you move these tables for me? Get all the chairs back under, pick those books up, give them like jobs that were physically demanding, and that gave them the kind of sensory input they needed, but also it stopped them going out and behaving really, really silly, you know, behaving like their cognitive age, but not their chronological age, and getting into trouble in the yard. It stopped all of those things as well. So tiny little things like that can have such a massive, massive impact, giving them set jobs to do that are physical, so they get the set, because it all comes down to OT and sensory. Like that has the biggest impact without a shadow of a doubt.
Thank you both. And I think so key, you know, Helen's talked about the diagnostic pathways and the cost of that, and some of these strategies we're talking about in schools at absolutely no cost. It's very much those attitudinal changes, getting colleagues on board to just recognise and have that open awareness. Okay, a couple of other questions I'm trying to pick out because I know we're not going to get through all of them. So Nicola asks, obviously we want no pregnant women to drink during pregnancy. However, for those who have complex addictions where abstinence is really not an option, is there anything at all that can be done to offer protection to that unborn child?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we have redesigned an alcohol pathway for North East and North Cumbria, and actually it's shared widely. It can be shared nationally. So we have the pathway, and depending on the severity of alcohol consumption, we would refer those women to specialists services, and that would depend what your local trust offered and what that looked like. But they can go for detox and support, and each care pathway would be designed around that particular woman's needs. So yeah, there is support. Obviously, we wouldn't advise heavy drinkers to stop instantly because that could be fatal. So they need to be supported under medical supervision to make sure they get the right care. And sometimes it's a bit of a balancing act between the well-being of the mum, the baby, and having a positive outcome as well. So yeah, you can't just say just stop drinking immediately to some women because it could be detrimental. So I can share the pathway. I can share the pathway. That's more than, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Another question here, how to convince other agencies, including mental health, that children may have other complexities, so trauma, attachment, but not everyone fits into these models, and we should be addressing, assessing for FASD as well, and not putting these children on the too difficult pile. Don't know whether that's kind of question, statement. Any thoughts on that, anyone?
I mean, I'm aware that Dr. Penny Garood is in the chat,
yes,
and she's one of our amazing FASD paediatricians and is very familiar. I don't know whether you want to come on and put yourself on video and explain the answers to that, Penny, but I know that they're being shuttled around sometimes between mental health and physical health. Good practice would be, if you were on any of the other pathways, that someone should be asking you about alcohol and pregnancy. We do need that clarity so that we can look at comorbidities as we're going down any of those diagnostic routes. That would be best practice. There is a shuffle and a bit of a shift, or you do that first and then we'll get it. Penny, did you want to come on and sort of explain what you're seeing as a paediatrician?
Yeah. Hi, so I'm Penny Garood. I'm a jobbing community paediatrician in North Tyneside and Northumberland. I have an interest in FASD for well over a decade, and yeah, I work in an environment where I really want to make good diagnoses, and I'm finding it a bit tricky at the minute, not for want of trying, but also finding it a little bit difficult where people still find the whole concept of FASD stigmatizing, and that's amongst colleagues as well, and very much want to say, well, but you've got this attachment, you've got all this trauma stuff going on, and like, we should just deal with that. And it's like, but again, you're fitting children into boxes that they don't necessarily fit in, and we need to be looking at the entirety of the child and asking those questions. And at the minute, I can ask those questions, but I can't necessarily answer them because I don't have the other professionals' time and resources to be able to ask that of them on a regular basis. And that's something that I'm trying to work on. And I'd be very keen to work with you, Maria, with Helen, everybody, to try and bring that to sort of fruition, both in my practice, but across the North East and North Cumbria ICB. But I absolutely agree that we need virtual school heads to be part of that, because that's very much also where that primary sort of mental health often sits, and so we all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. So from my perspective, understanding what's out there in terms of the co-working that's going on within other areas within the ICB, for me as a professional, would be really helpful in terms of being able to have those nuanced conversations at a local level in order to try and bootstrap ourselves up to offer a better service. Sorry, I hope that this is not too wordy for everybody else. I do apologise. I hope this doesn't come across as a rant. But yeah, I'm really
Thank
keen.
you for doing it and saying it so clearly, because it often gets left behind, the voice of the paediatricians, who are sometimes the ham and the sandwich, caught between the pressure from below, please diagnose, and the pressure from above, there's no commissioning. So thank you for highlighting those.
Thank you, Penny, and apologies, I got your name the wrong way around before, so apologies for that. Right, I'm going to take two more questions and then start to wrap up the session. So one of the questions was, is there an issue with parents and children's stigma at not wanting a diagnosis, or when they do have a diagnosis, actually discussing it with their child's school? Claire, do you want to take this one, because you've kind of talked about that stigma before?
Yeah, and I think I'm also very conscious that this is an adoptive parent's view, so I can and I know I've interviewed a few birth mothers on the podcast, and it is a very different experience a lot of the time. Common sense will tell you that it is, but I know that I have always I've never had any issue with wanting to talk about it. And my boys, I mean, they're very typical boys. They really couldn't really care less about the ins and outs of things, of who I talk to, or they couldn't really care less. But it's very important to my daughter, because she does have a very different life to the boys. But it is vital to her to know that I have explained everything about what's going on with her to anyone who's going to be interacting with her. It's vital. And I'm going to be brutally honest, whether or not it's easier for her because I'm not a biological mum, I don't know, although interestingly enough, another thing is she will try and say, but will you not tell them that I'm adopted though, because I grew in your tummy and I don't know what you're talking about that I didn't. Like, that's just her mindset. So I think if you tell them the right way, and mine had reached a point where life was so hard for them, it was like, oh, okay, it genuinely made some sense to them. like, right, this is what's going on, and it wasn't their fault, and it took the fear. My kids were terrified about how their life felt, and I didn't really realise that until I explained to them what was going on. And when I was able to say that birth mum, she was too poorly herself, that nobody had taken care of her to tell her that it wasn't a good idea to drink alcohol, because she wasn't alcoholic by any means. And that's a shock that I got, because I always assumed FASD only happened if you were alcoholic. That was the biggest shock to me. So yeah, I think that's answered it a little bit, certainly from an adoptive perspective. And I know that I've got things easier. I can't actually believe that I was just about to say, I know that I've got things easier. I don't know why I was going to say that. Obviously, I've got the hardest life of anyone I know. But I mean, when it comes to stigma, I don't get it as much.
Okay.
I took a young adult to a paediatric appointment, and on the way out, she'd got her diagnosis, and I said to her, what does that mean for you? How do you feel? What did you understand? And just to make sure she'd understood things clearly. And then she just paused and said, I'm dead glad really that I've got this diagnosis, because I always told people I couldn't remember properly, and I always told people I was trying my best and they didn't believe me. And then she goes, so she was in a family that mum had prolific alcohol use amongst, I think there was 5 or 6 siblings, all ended up getting diagnosed in the end. And she said, why did nobody ever ask me if my mum drank? I remember her being drunk the whole of my childhood. She goes, and she got diagnosed 16. That's how late it had been. And she goes, why did nobody ask? She'd been in care since she was 8 years old. She'd had annual child in care medicals. Nobody had raised it during the dot. She had the full facial features, full growth deficits. And she happened to come to me on a short break, a respite care. If she hadn't have come to me, she'd have continued on that. And her proudest thing, she's now 24, living independently, working her own job, having a great life. The thing that she's most proud of is, she says, because I was dead confident and made sure I got the diagnosis sorted and helped all the assessors do the assessments, I'm really proud because all my siblings now get help because of me, and I feel really good about that. So I think there's always this big assumption that everybody's going to have a hard time and a nightmare about getting a diagnosis and how they're going to feel. She'd felt everything in school because they kept saying she was naughty. She wasn't naughty. She needed supports and accommodations. She got her diagnosis at 16, got her EHCP at 16 because everybody said she didn't need an EHCP because it was behavioural. They didn't need an EHCP for that. Headed to college, passed everything at college onwards because she knew herself, stood herself, had the right accommodations, and she's flown ever since, supported internships and independent life. So I think it makes a really big difference, but don't let stigma put you off. I think it's the silencer of FASD. If we don't make it a big deal and be very caring and sympathetic and clear with people, we can take them on a less stigmatizing or no stigmatizing journey.
Thank you so much for Maria, and to all colleagues. I think a great positive to end on, you know, that we do have that opportunity to positively impact these young people's lives. And I was kind of reflecting there as we were finishing off the questions, what is it we can all go away and take away from today's huddle? And I think really it's that looking at things from a different lens, the attitudinal difference of us, just whether that's talking with professionals, whether that's talking with families, whether that's talking to our young people, you know, these are the people we're at the heart of this. So that real attitudinal change. So thank you to all of our speakers. It's been a really, really interesting huddle. We've had some fantastic questions, some fantastic responses. I know there's so much buzz in the chat around resources and sharing, and that's one of the reasons why I really love being part of this, the network, because I think I have a great belief that by working together, we can achieve more for our young people. So thank you to everyone. I know Amelia's just going to literally finish us off before we say goodbye.
Yes, thank you, Adele, and thank you to everyone for all the amazing contributions to this event. And I've collated all the resources, and we'll share the recording with the resources and the questions. And the questions that we didn't get to answer, we'll look at answering those as well. So thank you. So on the horizon, this is just a little bit about the network. We have our Healthier Together app and website. And on the next slide, there's a QR code. We'd highly recommend downloading this and advising the families that you work with too, because it's a fabulous resource, and on the website there's lots of professional resources as well, and it's led by our colleague Laura Cassidy. There's lots and lots of information, lots and lots of resources that are available for families and for professionals, and we're working on our young persons section as well. And in the next slide, there's a little bit about our communicating and engaging with the network. We've got around 2,000 members, so please do sign up. The link will be shared with the resources, and you'll receive our Child Health Tuesday bulletin weekly, and that shares a lot of our events as well as external events as well, and shares good practice. And then on the final slide, the bit that I wanted to pull out here is if you work with children, young people, and have a group who might want to be engaged with some of our work, there's a short form to fill in, and it's all around engagement, participation, and raising the voice of children and young people. So we really want to connect with you, as well as our network of networks, which is about our professionals connecting together. And then there's the Healthier Together app and website, and our email and log on registration details for the network. So just a final huge thank you to everyone for taking part. Please stay in touch. We will be sharing a short form, so any feedback is very, very welcome, and also future topics as well. So thank you. We're a minute over, so we've done well with such a huge agenda, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you.